You know what's funny how things go in hockey? We talked about a recent podcast, Reggie Leach heading to Philadelphia because California didn't keep him after Boston pretty well gave him up for very little besides Carol Vadnais. But the 1973-74 Philadelphia Flyers, who won the Cup that year, may have dodged a bullet in the playoff round because the Rangers upset the Montreal Canadiens, the non-Ken Dryden Montreal Canadiens, in the quarterfinal playoff. Philadelphia would have played Montreal in the second round, but all this plays out that I really think the Rangers had a good opportunity to beat the Flyers, but the roughness of that 6 game season really hurt them. Now the Flyers had led against the Rangers 2 games to nothing before the Rangers came back to win 2 straight at home. And this was a home and home series. The Flyers won game 5 at home 4-1, then lost 4-1 on the road, and a really rough game 7 in the Spectrum where the Rangers gave them all their work, but the Flyers outlasted them. In this contest, it was 1-1 after the first period. Now, the Flyers scored 2 in the second to lead 3-1, and the Rangers made it a goal game when Vickers scored his fourth of the postseason at 8:49 the third period. Dornhofer with the game winner followed 9-1, but Pete Stemkowski's late goal at 14:43 made the difference as Bernie Prom bet Jackman. This was a penalty-filled series, ladies and gentlemen. Now, how did the Rangers outlast Montreal in the quarterfinals? Well, here's what happened. Montreal had this habit in the 1970s and into the 80s losing the first game in the series, and they really paid for it here. They lost 4-1 at home against the Rangers in game 1. Didn't really show up because the Rangers were full measure for the victory. We talked about Stevie Vickers. The Rangers had led 3-0 on goals by Vickers, Bruce McGregor of all people, and Dale Rolfe, before Steve Shutt replied for Montreal. Now the second game was all Montreal at the Forum. They won 4-1, and Montreal went up in the series 2 games to 1 on the backs of a big game from Yvon Cornway and Pete Mahovlich. Mahovlich scored his first of the series, while Shutt and Cornway followed in the second period, and with Cornway making it 4-0 Montreal before the Rangers replied for 2 late goals. Now, what really hurt Montreal after losing 6-4 in New York, where the game should have been Montreal's, they failed in the third period by giving up 2 late counters after tying at 4-4. It was a 3-2 overtime loss at home that really hurt Montreal. Bruce McGregor had a great series. He scored 2 more goals in the contest. Henri Richard had gave Montreal an early 1-0 lead, but then, of all people, Ron Harris scored in the first overtime at 4:07 and on Forum ice to basically seal the series. And of course, the infamous 5-2 loss at home on the road, where Montreal had led pretty well 2-0. It was all Rangers the rest of the series. Montreal couldn't get any momentum at all in that set. Now, getting back to the Flyers and Rangers, ladies and gentlemen, the key contest, of course, which I think extended the series and was kind of a shock how it occurred. The Flyers were well on their way to winning the fourth game of the set. They were leading 1-0 for most of the first 2 periods before Bobby Russo's power play counter tied it with Gilbert winning in overtime. So this was a rough series for sure. So if there would have been a change, I don't think the Flyers would have been able to beat Montreal, because Montreal had a lot of rugged players, but really hurt Montreal that year. Michel Larocque had got the majority of the games that postseason, and it wasn't the best selection for Montreal in that series. Now there was some talk of the Michel Place or even Wayne Thomas would start a game, but they put Larocque in charge for the most of that contest. So I think what we have to look about this, and ladies and gentlemen, just kind of a talk about momentum. The Flyers were not as strong this season as Boston was in the regular season. Boston had more wins, more points, and Montreal losing 24 games that didn't happen very often back then. It was because they were trying to decide Thomas Plass or Michel Larocque. When Dryden came back the next year, he also had a limited momentum in the playoffs because Montreal always had trouble with Buffalo in the regular season and in the postseason at times. And ironically, this year, ladies and gentlemen, can you believe this? Despite the French Connection, the Sabres did not make the playoffs that year. They were 10 points behind a very strong Toronto team. And what really hurt Buffalo, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, it was their offense. They weren't scoring enough goals. That's the year, even with the French Connection, they only scored 242 counters. So that means with Richard Martin and Perreault and the rest of the players. Now, the Western Division, although weaker, they were scoring pretty well at the same pace. A little bit better on defense, but the thing is having St. Louis, Minnesota, and California on that side wasn't the strongest. And the Flames made the playoffs despite the fact, and the Kings, despite the fact that the Sabres had more points than Atlanta. So I think that's when we got to the 1 to the 16. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, there was only 16 teams in the league, so only 8 teams were in the postseason. And a lot of people believed, again, as well, that the Pittsburgh Penguins would have had a good chance at the postseason, but they weren't. They were giving up too many goals on defense and ended up losing 41 contests. But the ironic part of this season, ladies and gentlemen, Chicago only lost 14 games that year, but he tied 23. So that's why overtime went in. Chicago was basically pitter pat, and it showed in the playoffs. They could outlast the Kings, but by the time they faced Boston in the second round, there was not much left. And that Boston-Chicago series, if you like goals, 14 goals in the second game, and let me tell you something, a lot more could have been scored. So that's the story of the very bizarre way that the Flyers and the Rangers playing against each other determined the fact. I really think that Philadelphia only really started playing in the Rangers series when they lost that fourth game. They took the Rangers more seriously, and there was a whole bunch of stuff, with Dale Rolfe and some of the Rangers were a little bit too old, while the Flyers were coming up. So it's all the ways you look at it. But I think the Flyers were well measured for the 74 title. This was the pre-Reggie Leach Flyers, but I think Bobby Clark, especially in the key situation in the third period and overtime, the Flyers were the better team, and that's what played out. But you can imagine if Montreal and the Flyers would have met in 74 semifinals, who knows what would have happened. Montreal could have won. The Flyers could have been weakened so much they couldn't have beat Boston. So the Rangers were no Montreal Canadiens. They could take the Flyers to the limit, but see, Montreal had learned how to beat the Flyers the year before, and he bet Buffalo as well. That was a rough cup too. Buffalo Flyers and Chicago. But this was the Doug Favell Flyers, not the Bernie Parent Flyers, and that was a big factor. So if you like what we're doing here with our look at vintage Flyer era, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share. And don't forget, the Broad Street Bullies are still well liked. If you're a Flyer fan in here, we're glad you're here. Have a good one. Bye.